Hi there, I'm Phoenix Rising, founder of the Art of Self-Healing. I offer support, education, and inspiration for wounded helpers and healers. I'm a teacher, healer, mentor, and survivor of many things. I'm also an HSP, so I'm really excited to talk about today's topic. But first, I want to start our class with a 1-minute grounding meditation, so we can all just really take a minute to settle in. Closing the eyes if you feel comfortable. And really grounding into your seat or whatever it is that you're standing on or resting on. Taking a minute to check in with the body and breath. How are you feeling right now? What sensations do you notice? How can you bring a few deep, long breaths into your space right now, allowing it to fill the room? Allowing this moment to be your only moment of focus. I'd like to end with a collective breath. Exhale all of the air out of your lungs. Take a nice, deep, big inhale, and then let it go. Awesome. Okay, well, I'm really glad that you guys are all here with me today. Let me just swap the screen share. Okay, there we go. All right, well, welcome everyone. I gave a brief introduction of myself earlier, but I'd love to hear a little bit about you all in the audience. So if you feel comfortable, I'd love to take just a minute to find out your name, where you're calling from, and if you know anything about HSPs, like, is this something that you have a background in, or are you just brand new and don't even know what I'm talking about? And I'll unmute you as well. So you, anyone can chime in.
Hi, I'm Alice. I'm calling in from Denver, and I've learned a bit about HSPs from you before, but also yesterday I was reading a book summary on Blinkist about disruptive leadership, and there was something I saw in there about how highly sensitive people can make for highly effective leaders, which I thought was interesting as well. I was like, yes. So anyway, I'm excited to learn more.
Nice, awesome. Thanks a lot, Alice. And if anyone else wants to introduce themselves, or definitely no pressure. All right. Well, as I mentioned before, I am an HSP, and I will have to say that learning about being a highly sensitive person has really changed my life, especially because I'm not just a normal highly sensitive person. I'm an extroverted and also high sensation seeking. So I'll get into all of what that means later, but I just want to touch upon how important I think this information is for HSPs, because without knowing that you're different, it can be very confusing. And I think that I was navigating life up until a few years ago thinking that I was like everyone else somehow, but really recognizing now that there are some key things that make me very different, and it was actually causing me a lot of struggle and a lot of unnecessary pain. So I want to help, educate you all in the audience, and honestly anyone who will listen, because I think it's really, really important. And also, as non-HSPs, it's good to know that there are people like this out there. So, before I get into the rest, a little bit of a disclaimer. All of the information that I'm presenting today in this class is for educational purposes only. So I do a lot of teaching of self-healing, and what self-healing really means is taking the initiative to heal yourself with the things that make sense to you. That also means taking full responsibility for anything that you try and implement on yourself and what the effects of that might be. So just wanted to put that out there. You create your own safety, so please do it. All right. HSPs. I am going to share another screen. There we go. Okay. So before I get into the 4 main characteristics of HSPs, I want to talk about what it's like on like a day-to-day level, and less from a clinical standpoint and more from a human like narrative standpoint. So being an HSP can feel really overwhelming because we have a lot of stimuli in our world right now because of technology and the way that we're living. And highly sensitive people, it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. They're just really sensitive to stimuli. So they process a lot more stimuli around them. So for instance, for myself, if I go someplace new and I walk into a room, I'll probably notice a depth of things that other people aren't really paying attention to generally. I might notice the mood in the room, or I might notice who feels happy or sad. Those things just sort of come naturally. I might be really attuned to the light and the sounds of my experience, and it seems like other people aren't even really noticing. So those are just some examples of the depth of processing, which is one of the key markers for highly sensitive people. The next thing is, I really don't like this word. So they call it emotionally reactive. And as a highly sensitive person, that kind of rubs me the wrong way. Because I like to think of it more as being emotionally deep, or feeling things a lot. Reactive sounds kind of negative. And I think that having a deep emotional life is actually really enriching, and it can be wonderful. But when we're constantly bombarded with all of this stimuli and we're, feeling overwhelmed, dealing with intense emotions on top of that can just be like too much, So again, like, people don't necessarily understand that there are certain people who are going to be more emotional than other people. The next part is sensitive to subtle stimuli. So that kind of goes back to what I was mentioning, where you walk into a room and you just notice things that other people don't notice. And then overly stimulated, easily overly stimulated. I'm probably feeling a little overstimulated right now, honestly. I didn't really understand that being overstimulated was causing a lot of my problems, because I was living in New York City for most of my 20s, and there's just so much stimuli everywhere. And I was working with you know, a traumatized population of young people, and like that was really emotional, you know, and I'm processing all of these stimuli on like a really deep level, and I was constantly burning out and constantly just feeling like I couldn't handle my life and I couldn't really get a grip on like what was going on. You know, I thought I had borderline personality disorder, PTSD, all of these like symptomatic things were flagging on like what would be a clinical diagnosis. And yet I just didn't really want to buy into all of that. I just felt like I was really traumatized and just really stressed out all the time. So I think it's really confusing for people who are highly sensitive, because that also means that you have a highly sensitive nervous system, which means you're more prone to stress and trauma. How many HSPs are there? I'm glad you asked. It's about 15 to 20% of the population. And this is for a lot of the animals that they've done research on. This is actually like a normal mammal animal thing for about 15 to 20% of the population to be highly sensitive. And it's because it helps us evolve. If you have a certain population that's more sensitive to things, they're going to be the first ones who are like, this water tastes a little weird. Something's not quite right here. I think I smell smoke. The highly sensitive people are going to be the ones that kind of help to like protect the tribe. There are also the shamans and the healers, and a lot of highly sensitive people are actually like psychotherapists and other types of helping professionals. 70% of HSPs are introverted, and then 30% are extroverted. So I mentioned that I'm a very interesting, highly sensitive person because I'm on the extroverted side. And then even rarer is high sensation seeking, highly sensitive people. That means that I like to seek out different kinds of stimuli, such as in a place like New York City, because it like really excites me and I love experiencing new things. But I was constantly taxing my system out and bringing myself to overwhelm and then collapsing and just being burnt out and just not functioning. So really good to understand if this is happening to you as well. All right, that covers the basics of the characteristics of HSPs. Oh, you know what I forgot to mention? So the woman who has been doing research since the 90s on HSPs, Elaine Aronson, something like that. She's an HSP too, and she uses the acronym DOES for these 4 characteristics. So depth of processing, I think overly stimulated is supposed to be next, emotionally reactive, and then sensitive to subtle stimuli. So you can remember the does of highly sensitive people as a way to, you know, share this information with others. Okay. Great. So now I want to talk for a few minutes about empaths. So now that we've covered highly sensitive people, who are empaths? I can't believe I missed one of the most important markers for highly sensitive people, is that they're really empathic. What does that mean? That basically means that when you're engaging with someone else, you feel or get a sense of what they're feeling and what they're thinking and what their experience might be like. It's almost like it's happening to you. Well, it turns out that everyone has this capability. It's called mirror neurons in the brain, and it's just a basic way of how we're wired as humans. We all have mirror neurons, and it's so we can connect and, you know, build relationships with each other. However, what's happening is that a couple things. HSPs just have a higher level of empathy and of those mirror neurons because everything's on a spectrum, right? So when we talk about any symptom of any kind, it's on a spectrum. So that means like you might be able to identify certain characteristics and be like, is that me? But maybe it's just you a little bit, maybe it's you a lot. Does that make sense? So HSPs just have more empathy than the regular population. So I think in the past, we haven't really had the term for HSP. That's kind of a new thing. And so we've used the term empath. But really what I think was happening is that generally speaking, when we say empath, we're usually referring to highly sensitive people. What I think is happening for the rest of the population and why empathy just isn't very common and it's not really valued in our society is there's a lot of developmental trauma happening for our species. And again, everything's on a spectrum, so some people may have more developmental trauma than others, but we're generally cut off from our inner voice, that like spirit aspect of being human, and also each other. So it's really fascinating because I'm raising a baby right now, and he's 8 months yesterday. And it's really fascinating to see all of the information that I've learned and gathered over the years applying to him. And I'm losing my train of thought now. So something that because I was refreshing on all the child development books as he's growing, and something that is really interesting is that as a mother, we're supposed to be aligning the right side of our brain to our babies. So we're like right side brain aligned. The right side of the brain is the intuitive side. It's the more feminine side. It's the side that historically we've really like cut off as humans, and we've really gone towards like the logical left brain, very masculine way of doing things. So we've kind of cut off this right brain intuitive side. Babies don't speak, right? And so there's all this connection going on between my right side of the brain and his right side of the brain. And it's amazing. So the point of all of this is I don't think people are really recognizing just how easy it is to experience trauma at that age when you're really super, super young, because you just don't have a developed nervous system. And I think a lot of people are going through experiences where they don't get the things that they need, don't have the emotional support, don't have emotionally mature parents is a huge one, or their parents are really self-involved and just aren't giving them a lot of attention. We evolved in tribes with a lot of people taking care of those babies, and now we barely have one person taking care of a baby 24 hours, you know what I mean? So it's just, there's just a lot less contact that some babies are getting, basically. All right. I have a next slide for you all on what happens when people are experiencing developmental and childhood trauma. Is that essentially it's causing what would have been like a balanced person, you know, empath, HSP, really can be for anybody. You know, most people do have an intuitive side, have an empathetic side, but in order to be balanced, having good boundaries, you know, really listening and honoring your inner voice, being connected with nature and each other, and like shielding your energy and doing that work around like, you know, what are good spaces for me to be in, and what do I do when I show up in a space that doesn't feel good, and how can I manage that for myself? So trauma causes people to either go codependent or narcissistic. Now, what's really interesting is I actually think that most people are both. One, they might be more codependent and less narcissistic, or more narcissistic and less codependent, but I do think that there is a little bit of a flip-flop between these two. And we just really don't want to recognize our narcissistic side because it's been really kind of like demonized, like, oh, you can't think about yourself. How dare you? Like, you know? So I'm going to go over what these different terms mean. So for the codependent person, they're really driven to fix, save, and rescue. And that again goes back to those early childhood wounds where they weren't really feeling like their needs were being met and recognized, and instead they had to cater to a parent who was very rigid, wanted things a certain way, and was not able to like emotionally attune to the child. So the child ends up emotionally attuning to the parent and all the people around them. So they're like, oh, well, I don't matter anymore. I don't matter because no one's paying attention to me and giving me the care and love I really need. So I'm going to turn that empathy outward toward everyone else as a way to cope. So that means that you have a lack of personal boundaries, a lack of an authentic self, and then you tend to just be constantly busy, like finding things that, finding things to fix, save, rescue, or control. Control is a big one for the codependent folks. But again, it's all just trying to cope with that early trauma. Then you have the narcissistic version. So that's empathy turned inward. So instead of turning that empathy outward, it's all about the self. It's all about how can I get my needs met, my wants met, me, 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 me. And when you think about it, like all children kind of go through a phase of this. And what happens with developmental trauma is they never grow out of it, right? So they lack personal accountability, cannot handle criticism, and tend to be in a victim state. They believe that life is happening to them and it's like scary and not good, and that they're just in that victim place, which is a really terrible place to be in. So I think that there's a lot of confusion with this. Basically, empaths tend to think that they're being targeted by narcissists, and that narcissists are energy vampires who are trying to like suck all of their energy out because they're so empathetic and caring and they just love everyone. And they think that like, oh, bad narcissist. But really what's happening for those people is that they're playing out the codependent side of that relationship, right? So the two balance each other out and are attracted to each other. Now the narcissist it's not like they don't have any empathy. It's just empathy turned inward. And I think that sometimes they can show empathy. And so it can be confusing to really like nail this down. I think that everyone's fluid and we're all many things at many times, and to try and put labels on us and to fit us into boxes, it's just not really fair and it's not really accurate. So just something to keep in mind as we're using these words and terms, like take what resonates with you, leave what doesn't. It's all just one way of looking at it. So I want to talk about what codependency means historically, especially for you mental health professionals who are watching. It actually came from the Alcoholics Anonymous community. So AA was set up back in the 30s, and originally they were just really focused on the alcoholics. About the 50s, they started to recognize, hey, if we included families, we could actually help people heal faster and really take a more like holistic approach. So they started inviting families in and started Al-Anon, which is Alcoholics Anonymous for like spouses and families. And what they realized is the partner of these alcoholics actually had like a similar, like almost like the opposing part of the pattern, and they were enabling that alcoholism. So fast forward like decades later, codependency is now a very like general term that people really throw around, and the mental health field kind of doesn't like to use it. I didn't really learn a lot about it in grad school, and I've really had to do my research and like dig deep to find like what does it really mean at its core and what's really happening with codependency. So what they found by opening up the definition of codependency to be broader than just someone who's in a partnership with an alcoholic who's like helping enable them and seems to be somehow addicted to this drama cycle, it's actually has to do with narcissists. So what they found is that codependent people end up with narcissists and addicts. So thinking about that previous slide that I just showed you, it's again like balancing those two out with the codependent and the narcissist kind of like personality traits. So I think that's really fascinating. This is not information that you're going to hear from just anyone, anywhere. So I really hope that it resonates with you and is making sense. So the last thing I want to cover is just a couple qualities about narcissism. Not narcissism, sorry. I have one more slide, let me pull it up. Okay. So I just want to kind of compare in another way the empath qualities versus like codependency. Because again, like everyone can have these different empathic qualities to different degrees. And so I think we're all prone to codependency. You know, it's not like a highly sensitive person thing, it's just an everybody thing. So that's definitely important to understand. So empaths, you know, feel the emotions of others as if they're their own. Same with mental states. I haven't gotten to talk a lot about energy because there's energy all around us. Everything really is energy. You know, you can take a science perspective, you can take a spiritual perspective, and empaths are just more in touch with energy. And again, typically when we say empaths, we're talking about HSPs, but this is abilities that everyone has. Empaths tend to feel drawn to help others in the world, and they're compassionate and giving. Instead of the codependent where they're trying to like fix or problem solve or like be the savior, you know, I want to show up so I can save you and look how good I am. Kind of narcissistic, right? The empath, the balanced empath can hold space in a way that doesn't try and change anything. It's almost just like a witnessing and a being present. That's powerful for healing. So the empath can show up like that and not be attached to the outcomes of their clients. Whereas a codependent will be very attached to outcomes. You know, they want their client to, you know, hit a certain marker and progress in a certain way, and that's just not reality. Again, it's sort of why I do the self-healing work, because I think we all have our own way of healing, and it just looks different for different people. So codependent qualities, you know, feeling like because you feel so deeply the emotions and reactions of other people, you're trying to manage their emotions and their reactions so you don't have to feel the same way, right? So if somebody's angry and they're around you and then you start to feel angry and you're like, oh my God, stop being angry. How dare you be angry over there? You're not allowed to be angry, you know, or whatever the emotion is, right? That's a codependent person because there's no, like they're not able to balance themselves and recognize that, okay, I am feeling the things that this other person's feeling, and that's okay. I don't have to do anything about it. I can let them have their experience, and I don't need to even like really focus on it. You know, I can just continue to focus on my experience and what's coming up for me inside and leave them alone. So it just gives you kind of like a day-to-day example of like what that really looks like playing out. And you can see why people are like trying to control each other's reactions, like the Black Lives Matter, like you can't be racist over there. That's not allowed. It's like, well, they can be, and they are. If you're bothered, maybe, you know, like there's only so, there's only so much we can do with other people. Like we just can't control other people. People are just going to have their viewpoint. Like we can try and tell them like, oh, don't be racist. This is why, how you're being racist and like how that's affecting other people. They might not be able to understand or in the place to really hear you. And I think that when it comes to those conversations, it's all about knowing who you're talking to, the relationship that you have, and how to really go about that conversation in a way for someone to hear you and not just be defensive. So kind of going on a little bit of a rant there. Back to codependent qualities. So codependent people tend to think they know what's going on inside someone's head better than the person does, or better than they actually do. So that can end up looking like a lot of gaslighting. They can often feel overwhelmed by others' energy, and again, driven to fix, save, or rescue. Okay. I hope that you're thinking about questions, because there's questions and answers at the end. And we're almost to that part. Wonderful. Okay, so just wrapping up a couple points. If you are curious, are you an HSP? Are you a high sensation seeking HSP like me? You can go to www.hsperson.com. There are self-tests and a wealth of resources on that website. And you can get most of your questions answered there if I can't answer them for you in the Q&A. All right. Are you interested in learning more about how to stay balanced as a highly sensitive person or someone who identifies as having, you know, a lot of empathic abilities? Well, I have a 12-week course coming up on nervous system recovery for highly sensitive people. It starts October 3rd. You will learn how to greatly reduce your day-to-day stress, process trauma naturally, and have better boundaries for yourself and with other people. I think they're really core skills that need to be built if you've been experiencing developmental trauma and you're an HSP and life just seems kind of overwhelming for you generally. I'd highly recommend checking it out. I do have some sliding scale options available, so please come talk to me if you're interested and that's maybe a sticky point for you. I'd love to chat with you more about it, especially if you're a good match for my program. Who's a good match? If you've been doing some healing work on yourself for a while and you feel like you've kind of like tapped out in other areas, like you have a good sense of like what the different healing modalities are from a more Western standpoint, from a more clinical standpoint, and you're looking for something that's more outside the box, more holistic, that ties body, mind, and soul all together so you can really show up on that next level of your life and do that next level of healing, because it is amazing on the other side. For me personally, after doing this healing work and this like nervous system recovery on myself, I am just like a different person. It's why I call myself Phoenix, because I am that different than the person who was traumatized and just really in a bad place before. All of my services are listed on my website, which I will pull up right now. My website is www.theartofselfhealing.org. There's a lot of information on there, free. And then I do these monthly free classes. So definitely, if you want to learn more, please subscribe on my website. Follow me on Instagram. And there are all the information I was trying to get up. So thank you so much for being here. I can't do this work without you, because or else then I'm just by myself and that's pretty lame. So I really appreciate you being here. Please reach out to me if you watch this at home and you have questions. Like I am available, like I'm still, you know, building my business. So I do have time to answer some of those questions either through Instagram or by email. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions, now would be the time. It's okay. I'm seeing some shakes. Well, if you think of any questions afterwards, definitely feel free to reach out to me and let me know. Okay. Well, since there are no questions, we do have like a little bit of time left. If you just want to maybe say some general comments about what you thought about today's class, and if anything like struck you in any particular way.
I think it was interesting for me to think about the kind of dynamic of the codependent and the narcissist, and just kind of thinking about how being a highly sensitive person plays into that. Was interesting to me. That kind of like that codependent narcissist dynamic reminds me too of like attachment theory, like the anxious avoidant pattern. So I hadn't really thought of that. So that was kind of interesting to think of.
Yeah, I definitely think that they're tied. So attachment theory, definitely. And you know what's interesting? I don't think I say this enough about developmental trauma because it's a really easy way to look at it. But developmental trauma is you did not have a secure attachment during those early years. So any of the insecure attachments, that's all developmental trauma. You know, obviously disorganized attachment being the most severe of the three. But yeah, that's a really good point to bring that in. Thank you, Alice. I don't know if we have any other comments. But I will, like I said, I'll be doing these free classes every month. I'm right in the process of moving out of my apartment and into a tiny camper because I'm going nomadic with my family. So things are a little, I haven't planned October's class yet, but be on the lookout. Please subscribe to my website and you'll get updated on all the classes and programs that I have coming up. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and I hope that this was helpful.